If this convoy keeps moving through that valley, someone isn't coming home. The words drifted across the crisp morning air with unsettling calm, almost swallowed by the rumble of idling military vehicles. No one answered immediately. Several Marines glanced toward the woman who had spoken, then exchanged amused looks before returning to their equipment checks. The sun had barely risen over the jagged mountains of northern Afghanistan. Thin layers of mist clung stubbornly to the rocky slopes while the forward operating base slowly came alive with the familiar sounds of engines, radio chatter, and boots striking packed dirt. Another mission. Another patrol. Another day that everyone expected to unfold exactly as planned. Emily Carter adjusted the straps of her weathered rucksack without saying another word. She stood slightly apart from the assault team, dressed in the same dusty camouflage uniform as everyone else. Her blonde hair was secured tightly beneath her helmet, her pale face marked by weeks of exhaustion and fine layers of desert dust. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was different from the other personnel gathering around the convoy. Except her eyes. While the rest of the team focused on maps and objectives, Emily never stopped studying the ridgeline surrounding the valley entrance. Every shadow. Every rock formation. Every patch of silence. Staff Sergeant Ryan Holt folded his map and walked toward the convoy with easy confidence. At 34, Holt had led enough successful operations to trust experience over instinct, and today's assignment looked routine. Escort engineers through the valley, inspect a damaged communications relay, and return before sunset. Simple. At least on paper. You coming? Holt called without looking at Emily. She nodded once but kept her eyes fixed on the mountains. Those ridges aren't clear. The sentence was quiet. Almost casual. Holt finally looked at her. What makes you think that? Emily answered with the same calm expression. I'm recon-trained. Several nearby Marines overheard the exchange. One of them let out a short laugh. Recon? Corporal Ethan Brooks repeated, grinning as he loaded another magazine into his rifle. Didn't know they were sending sightseeing experts now. Another Marine chuckled. I thought recon people stayed behind binoculars. A third shook his head. Relax. Intel swept this route yesterday. Laughter spread naturally through the small group. No one sounded cruel. Just confident. Emily never reacted. She simply reached into her vest and pulled out a folded topographic map covered with tiny handwritten notes. Instead of pointing toward enemy positions, she traced a narrow ridgeline with one gloved finger before quietly folding it again. No speeches. No arguments. No attempt to convince anyone. Only silence. Years of reconnaissance had taught her one lesson better than any instructor ever could. People rarely listened before the shooting started. Captain Daniel Mercer climbed onto the lead vehicle and addressed the assembled convoy. Move out in 2 minutes. Engines roared louder. Doors slammed shut. Radios crackled with final checks. Dust rose into the cold mountain air. Emily climbed into the last vehicle without another word. As the convoy rolled toward the valley entrance, her gaze remained fixed on the towering cliffs above them. She wasn't looking for enemies. She was looking for what wasn't there. No shepherds. No birds crossing the ridgeline. No loose rocks disturbed by mountain goats. The valley was too quiet. Far too quiet. Most soldiers found comfort in silence. Emily Carter had learned to fear it. Hundreds of feet above the convoy, hidden behind fractured limestone and camouflage netting that blended perfectly into the mountain, unseen figures watched through rifle scopes. One man slowly raised a hand. Another adjusted the timer beside a concealed explosive. Below them, the convoy continued forward, unaware that 14 sets of patient eyes were already tracking every vehicle, every Marine, and every predictable step into the narrowing valley. The convoy disappeared deeper into the valley, its line of armored vehicles winding through the narrow pass like a slow-moving steel serpent. Towering cliffs rose on both sides, casting long shadows across the dirt road. Every few hundred yards, the walls squeezed tighter, forcing the vehicles into single file. Inside the last MRAP, conversation flowed as casually as if they were driving across a training range back home. Corporal Ethan Brooks leaned his rifle against the door and smirked at Emily. "So tell me," he said. "Recon training. What exactly does that mean these days?" A couple of Marines laughed. Emily kept her attention outside the bulletproof window. "It means I observe before I move." Brooks shrugged. "I observe too." She didn't answer. Private Lucas Reed joined in. "I heard recon guys spent half their careers hiding behind rocks." "Guess that's why she's so quiet," another Marine joked. More laughter filled the cabin. Staff Sergeant Ryan Holt glanced toward the rear of the vehicle. "Knock it off." His voice wasn't angry. Just enough to end the conversation. Still, he wasn't convinced by Emily's warning either. The mission had already been cleared by intelligence. Drone surveillance had shown no unusual activity. Satellite imagery revealed nothing suspicious. Everything pointed toward another routine security escort. Everything except the uneasy feeling Emily couldn't ignore. She watched the ridgeline drift past. No movement. No livestock. No local children. No smoke from cooking fires. Even the wind sounded wrong. She leaned slightly toward Holt. "Sir." He looked over. "The valley's empty." He frowned. "That's the point." She slowly shook her head. "No." Her voice remained calm. "It's too empty." Before Holt could respond, the convoy commander came over the radio. "Convoy Alpha, maintain interval. 5 minutes to objective." Acknowledgements crackled one after another. Emily reached into a pouch and quietly removed a small notebook. Its pages were filled with hand-drawn terrain sketches, elevation notes, and tiny observations gathered over years of reconnaissance missions. Her pencil stopped over a narrow choke point marked with a simple circle. The perfect kill zone. She looked outside once more. A raven landed on a dead tree near the ridgeline. Then, without warning, it launched back into the sky. Emily's eyes narrowed. Birds rarely abandoned a perch without reason. Not unless something had disturbed them first. "Stop the convoy," she said quietly. Nobody reacted. She raised her voice just enough. "Stop the convoy." Brooks sighed dramatically. "Seriously?" Holt looked toward the front windshield, then back at Emily. "Give me one reason." She answered without hesitation. "Because someone is already waiting for us." For a brief moment, silence settled inside the vehicle. Then the radio hissed again. "Lead vehicle entering the Narrows now." Outside, the first armored truck rolled beneath the towering cliffs. High above, concealed behind weathered limestone and camouflage netting, 14 rifles slowly aligned with practiced precision. One gloved finger clicked the safety selector forward. Another hand tightened around a detonator. The trap was no longer being prepared. It was waiting for a single command. The explosion lifted the lead vehicle off the ground before anyone inside the convoy had time to react. A deafening blast ripped through the narrow valley, sending dirt, shattered rock, and twisted steel into the air. The shockwave slammed against the cliff walls, multiplying into a roar that echoed for miles. Contact front. Automatic gunfire erupted almost instantly. Muzzle flashes burst from hidden positions high above the ridgelines. Bullets hammered against armored doors, cracked windshields, and showered the convoy with fragments of stone. Inside the last MRAP, Marines were thrown violently against their seats. "Ambush," someone shouted. "Take cover." Radio traffic dissolved into overlapping screams. "We're pinned down. Need suppressive fire. Medic." Emily had already unlatched her harness before the vehicle stopped moving. The instant her boots hit the ground, she didn't fire a single shot. Instead, she looked. Left ridge. Right ridge. Elevation. Angles. Escape routes. Years of reconnaissance training overpowered instinct. While everyone else searched for muzzle flashes, Emily searched for patterns. The enemy wasn't trying to destroy the convoy immediately. They were funneling it. Driving every vehicle deeper into the kill zone. A second explosion detonated behind the final truck. The escape route disappeared beneath a cloud of dust and burning debris. "We're trapped," Corporal Brooks yelled. Staff Sergeant Holt fired several controlled bursts toward the cliffs, but the distance was too great. "They're over 600 meters. We can't see half of them." Rounds continued raining down from multiple directions. Emily dropped to one knee behind a shattered boulder. She counted. 1 firing point. 3. 5. 8. No. More. Far more. Her breathing slowed. Each burst revealed another position. Each echo gave away another angle. She closed her eyes for less than a second, assembling the battlefield inside her mind. 14. Exactly 14 shooters. Not random. Layered. Disciplined. Professionally positioned. Captain Mercer came over the damaged radio. "All units hold position." Emily grabbed the handset. "Negative." Static crackled. "Negative, Captain. They're controlling every avenue. We stay here." She looked toward the burning lead vehicle. "We die here." No reply came. Only interference. The command net had been crippled. Holt crawled beside her, breathing hard. "What do you see?" Emily answered without looking away from the ridge. "They're not militia." "What?" "They're trained." Another burst shattered the rock inches above their heads. Stone fragments sprayed across Holt's face. Emily calmly wiped dust from her cheek. "They built overlapping fields of fire. They've already measured this valley. They knew exactly where we'd stop." Brooks slid in behind cover, panic spreading across his face. "So what do we do?" Emily studied the terrain one final time. A narrow drainage cut disappeared behind a line of broken limestone on the western slope. Invisible from the main battlefield. Too steep for vehicles. Perfect for one person. She rose into a crouch. Holt grabbed her arm. "Where are you going?" Emily looked toward the hidden ravine. "They're watching all of you." Then she met Holt's eyes. "But they're not watching where I'm going." Without waiting for permission, she sprinted toward the shattered rocks as enemy rounds chased the ground behind her. From the convoy, it looked exactly like she was abandoning the fight. Several Marines watched her disappear into the dust. Brooks stared after her. In disbelief. "I knew it," he muttered bitterly. She ran. No one noticed that every step Emily Carter took carried her farther from the convoy, and closer to the 14 hunters waiting above. Emily Carter disappeared into the maze of broken limestone without looking back. The sounds of the firefight faded behind her, replaced by something far more valuable. Silence. She slowed from a sprint to a careful walk, every step placed with deliberate precision. Loose stones remained undisturbed beneath her boots. Dry branches stayed unbroken. Even her breathing settled into a slow, measured rhythm. This was no longer a battle. It was reconnaissance. The narrow drainage channel twisted upward through the mountain, hidden beneath overhanging rocks that concealed it from both the convoy below and the enemy firing positions above. Years earlier, instructors had drilled one lesson into every Recon Marine. If the enemy knows where you are, stop being there. Emily paused beside a weathered boulder and knelt. She closed her eyes. The valley echoed with distant gunfire, but she wasn't listening to the shooting. She was listening between the shots. A rifle cracked from the eastern ridge. Half a second later, another answered from farther north. Different echoes. Different elevations. She pictured each position as if sketching a map inside her mind. 14. Still 14. No movement. Confident shooters rarely reposition during the opening phase of an ambush. That confidence would become their weakness. Emily removed a compact pair of binoculars from her pack. Instead of scanning for people, she searched for mistakes. Fresh scrape marks on pale limestone. A strand of camouflage fabric fluttering against a dark rock. An unnatural shadow where sunlight should have reached. Tiny details. Tiny mistakes. One by one, the invisible battlefield revealed itself. Nearly 300 yards ahead, a sniper shifted his weight just enough to dislodge a pebble. Emily never saw the man. She saw the pebble. It bounced once, twice, then disappeared over the cliff's edge. She quietly marked position 1 in her notebook. Further west, sunlight reflected for less than a heartbeat. Not from glass. From a rifle scope adjustment. Position 2. A faint cloud of dust drifted from beneath another concealed firing point after recoil disturbed dry soil. Position 3. Emily never smiled. There was nothing satisfying about being right. Below her, another explosion shook the valley. Radio traffic erupted through her earpiece. Mercer hit. Need a medic. Can't reach the west side. The transmission dissolved into static. She switched the radio off. Noise no longer mattered. Information did. Emily climbed higher until the valley opened beneath her like a map. From this elevation, the enemy formation finally made sense. It wasn't 14 independent shooters. It was a layered reconnaissance ambush. Spotters. Riflemen. Machine gun support. An observer controlling overlapping fields of fire from a central position. Professional. Disciplined. Patient. Exactly the kind of unit Recon Marines were trained to dismantle. She removed a grease pencil and drew quick arrows across the back of her folded map. Primary observer. Support gunner. Escape route. Blind sector. The pattern emerged with startling clarity. Take out the observer, the entire ambush would lose coordination. Emily checked her rifle. One slow breath. Magazine seated. Bolt forward. Suppressor secure. She looked once toward the valley where Marines continued fighting for survival. From below, everyone probably believed she had abandoned them. They couldn't see the battlefield the way she did. They were surviving the ambush. Emily was preparing to erase it. Far across the ridge, hidden behind stacked stones and camouflage netting, the enemy observer lifted his binoculars to confirm the convoy remained trapped. He never considered the possibility that someone had climbed above him. Because Recon Marines rarely attacked from the direction anyone expected. Emily settled into the shadows behind a fractured slab of limestone, her rifle resting motionless across her pack. She didn't place her finger on the trigger. Not yet. Recon wasn't about firing first. It was about making the first shot impossible to survive. The first shot broke the silence without anyone realizing where it had come from. It wasn't loud. The suppressor turned the rifle's report into a dull crack that vanished beneath the chaos already echoing through the valley. High above the convoy, the enemy observer stiffened. His binoculars slipped from his hands as he collapsed behind the rocks. No warning. No shout. No second chance. Emily never watched him fall. Her scope was already searching for the next position. Recon training had taught her that success wasn't measured by a perfect shot. It was measured by momentum. Never stop moving. Never fire twice from the same place. She rolled backward behind the limestone shelf, slid down several feet, and climbed into another firing position hidden by scattered brush. Less than 10 seconds had passed. Below, confusion spread across the enemy line. One machine gun abruptly stopped firing. "Where did that come from?" a voice shouted in a foreign language. Another fighter leaned from behind cover to locate the threat. Emily noticed the movement before the man finished exposing his shoulder. One controlled squeeze. The rifle barely moved. The fighter disappeared from sight. Position 2. She immediately left the spot. No hesitation. No celebration. Every firing position was temporary. Every second increased the chance that someone would detect her. She climbed across broken rock, keeping below the skyline. Years of reconnaissance patrols had taught her how mountains carried sound. How shadows shifted. How sunlight revealed careless movement. She became another shadow among hundreds. Far below, Staff Sergeant Holt noticed something strange. Enemy fire had begun to lose rhythm. The precise overlapping bursts were becoming scattered. Machine gun support suddenly went silent. What happened? Brooks shouted over the gunfire. Holt looked toward the ridge. I don't know. Then another rifle position stopped firing. And another. The volume of incoming rounds noticeably decreased. Captain Mercer pressed against the damaged lead vehicle, trying to understand what had changed. No air support yet. Negative. No drones. Negative. Then who's hitting them? No one had an answer. Back on the ridgeline, Emily paused behind a weathered outcrop and watched 3 enemy riflemen searching desperately across the opposite slope. They were looking exactly where she wanted them to look. Away from her. One fighter pointed toward the eastern cliffs. Another began directing fire at an empty ridge nearly 400 yards away. Emily quietly exhaled. Misdirection. The oldest trick in reconnaissance. She slipped behind them through a narrow depression hidden by waist-high scrub grass. The distance closed. 100 yards. 70. 50. Now she could hear them speaking. None of them imagined the threat had moved behind their line. Emily rested the rifle against a flat stone. One breath. One trigger press. The nearest rifleman collapsed before turning around. The second spun toward the sound. Too late. A second controlled shot dropped him beside the first. The third abandoned his weapon and ran toward higher ground. Emily didn't chase him immediately. She watched. Recon Marines hunted patterns before people. The fleeing man wasn't escaping. He was running toward someone more important. Toward whoever had taken command after the observer died. Emily slowly rose and followed at a distance, her footsteps swallowed by the wind. Behind her, 5 enemy firing positions had already fallen silent. Below, the Marines trapped inside the valley still believed they were simply surviving. None of them realized that somewhere above the cliffs, the woman they thought had abandoned them was quietly dismantling the ambush one position at a time. And for the first time since the battle began, the hunters were beginning to realize that someone was hunting them. The man Emily had allowed to escape never looked behind him. He stumbled over loose stone, breathing hard, clutching his rifle as he climbed toward the highest ridge overlooking the valley. Every few seconds he glanced downhill, convinced the threat was still somewhere below. He never imagined it was following 20 yards behind him. Emily moved when he moved. She stopped when he stopped. Recon training was never about speed. It was about disappearing. The fighter finally reached a concealed command position tucked beneath an overhanging slab of rock. Camouflage netting blended into the mountainside so perfectly that it was invisible from the valley floor. Beneath it stood the new leader of the ambush, issuing calm orders over a field radio while 2 riflemen guarded the approach. Emily settled behind a fractured boulder and watched. No rush. No emotion. She counted. Leader. 2 guards. 1 machine gun covering the southern escape route. Another spotter 50 yards farther east. 5 targets. Remove them, and the remaining shooters would lose every coordinated advantage. Below, the convoy continued exchanging fire, but something had already changed. The enemy no longer attacked with precision. Individual rifle shots replaced synchronized volleys. Orders came late. Machine guns fired in the wrong sectors. The ambush was beginning to unravel. Captain Mercer noticed it first. "They're losing coordination," he shouted. Holt peered toward the ridgeline. "They're arguing with each other." Brooks fired another controlled burst before ducking behind cover. What changed? No one answered. No one could. Emily rested the rifle against her pack. The commander leaned over his radio, frustration visible in every movement. He waved 1 guard toward the western slope. The second guard shifted to cover another angle. Exactly what Emily had been waiting for. The formation opened. She inhaled slowly. The first shot struck the radio operator before he finished speaking. The commander spun around. The second shot dropped the nearest guard. The third shattered the machine gun position before the gunner could swing the barrel. Confusion exploded across the ridge. "Sniper! Behind us! Find her!" The remaining fighters scattered in different directions instead of supporting one another. Emily was already gone. She slid backward into another depression, crossed 30 yards of broken terrain, and emerged behind a cluster of wind-shaped rocks overlooking the eastern slope. Another fighter appeared between 2 boulders. 1 shot. Silence. The spotter sprinted toward cover. Emily tracked him through the scope. He paused just long enough to look back. The final shot found him before he took another step. The mountains fell. Strangely quiet. Only scattered gunfire echoed through the valley now. Emily checked her notebook. She quietly crossed out another series of numbers. 9. 10. 11. 12. 2 remained. She looked across the ridgeline, studying every shadow with patient eyes. Recon Marines never assumed a battle was over because the shooting stopped. Silence could be another weapon. Minutes passed. Then she noticed movement near the original observation post. 2 figures crawled carefully between the rocks, trying to reach an escape trail leading north through the mountains. They weren't retreating randomly. They were protecting each other. Experienced. Disciplined. Emily adjusted her position one final time. Wind drifted gently across the ridge. She waited. The first man stepped into the narrow gap. 1 controlled shot. He collapsed instantly. The last fighter froze, searching desperately for an enemy he could neither see nor understand. Emily lowered her breathing until everything around her disappeared except the steady center of the reticle. 1 final squeeze. The last rifle fell silent. 14 enemy positions. No backup. No air support. No second shooter. Only a Recon Marine who had warned them before the first shot was ever fired. The silence after the final shot felt almost unreal. For several long seconds, nothing moved on the ridgeline except the wind. Emily Carter remained exactly where she was. She didn't stand. She didn't celebrate. She continued watching through her scope, waiting for the mistake that experienced fighters often made after pretending to be dead. None came. Only then did she lower the rifle. Far below, the convoy noticed the change almost immediately. The relentless gunfire that had trapped them inside the valley had faded into scattered echoes. Captain Daniel Mercer cautiously lifted his head above the engine block where he had taken cover. No incoming rounds. Staff Sergeant Ryan Holt looked toward the western ridge. The machine guns are gone. Corporal Ethan Brooks listened carefully. I don't hear anyone. Another Marine slowly rose behind a damaged vehicle. Still nothing. The valley, moments earlier filled with explosions and shouting, had become eerily quiet. Mercer grabbed the radio. All units. His voice was steady but cautious. Prepare to move. The convoy advanced only a few yards before stopping again. Nobody trusted silence in a place like this. 2 fire teams climbed toward the nearest enemy positions to clear the ridgelines. Every Marine expected another fight. Instead, they found bodies. One rifleman behind carefully stacked rocks. Another beside an abandoned machine gun. A third lying across a concealed observation point. Every position had been neutralized with remarkable precision. No wasted ammunition. No prolonged firefights. No signs of panic. Only disciplined, deliberate marksmanship. Lieutenant Aaron Mills, leading one of the clearing teams, knelt beside the enemy commander. The field radio beside him had been destroyed by a single round. He looked around slowly. This wasn't random. Another Marine examined the surrounding terrain. They were engaged from multiple angles. But we only had one sniper assigned. Mills quietly shook his head. No. He pointed toward a series of faint boot prints crossing the limestone. One person. They kept moving. His voice carried genuine disbelief. Whoever did this never fired twice from the same position. Farther uphill, another team discovered discarded shell casings. Only one casing remained at each firing point. One shot. Move. One shot. Move again. The pattern repeated across the entire ridgeline. Staff Sergeant Holt climbed higher until he reached the final observation post overlooking the valley. From there, the entire battlefield unfolded beneath him. Only now did he understand. Every enemy position had been dismantled in the exact sequence needed to collapse the ambush. Observer first. Command. Machine guns. Spotters. Riflemen. The convoy hadn't escaped because of luck. Someone had systematically removed every layer holding the trap together. A faint metallic sound drew Holt's attention. He turned. 50 yards away, Emily Carter sat quietly beneath a weathered rock ledge. Her rifle rested across her knees. She wasn't looking at the battlefield. She was calmly replacing an empty magazine before checking the chamber one. Final time. Her breathing had already returned to normal. A small scrape on her cheek was the only visible sign that she had spent the last hour alone on the mountain. Holt stared at her for several seconds. So. He finally said. You really were recon-trained. Emily looked up briefly. A faint, tired smile crossed her face. I tried to tell you. She stood, slung the rifle over her shoulder, and picked up her pack as though the mission had been nothing more than another patrol. Behind Holt, Marines continued discovering enemy positions across the ridgeline. One. Then another. Then another. Each discovery deepened the silence among the men who had laughed at her warning only an hour earlier. For the first time that day, they finally understood exactly what one Recon Marine could accomplish without backup. The convoy returned to the forward operating base just before sunset. The mountains that had echoed with gunfire only hours earlier now stood silent beneath a fading orange sky. Medics moved between vehicles treating minor injuries while recovery teams unloaded damaged equipment from the lead truck. No one spoke much. The mission had ended successfully. Yet every Marine kept replaying the same question. How had one woman dismantled an entire ambush alone? Inside the Command Operations Center, Captain Daniel Mercer stood before a large tactical display. Helmet cameras from the convoy had automatically uploaded their recordings. Staff Sergeant Ryan Holt entered carrying Emily's mission notebook. I thought you should see this. Mercer accepted it without opening it. I want the video first. The room lights dimmed. The first recording showed the convoy entering the valley. Emily's warning echoed through the speakers. If we keep this route. She paused. Someone isn't coming home. Several officers exchanged quiet glances. The footage continued. The ambush. The explosions. The confusion. Then came the moment everyone remembered. Emily breaking away from the convoy. Corporal Brooks lowered his head. I called her a coward. Nobody answered. The screen switched to drone footage captured after communications were restored. The operators had finally recovered enough signal to review delayed aerial recordings. What appeared on the monitor stunned the room. Emily wasn't running. She had been climbing. While every Marine fought to survive below, she moved along narrow ridgelines invisible from the valley floor. The drone followed her route from above. She paused. Observed. Moved. Observed again. Not once did she rush. Not once did she expose herself unnecessarily. Captain Mercer folded his arms. Pause it. The image froze. Emily stood behind a weathered rock studying the terrain instead of firing. What is she looking at? One lieutenant asked. No one answered. Then Holt quietly spoke. Not people. Everyone turned toward him. Patterns. The video resumed. Each engagement lasted only seconds. One shot. Relocate. Another shot. Disappear. The replay markers showed distances stretching across multiple ridgelines. Every firing position had been chosen before the trigger was pulled. Every movement forced the enemy to search the wrong direction. The officers watched in complete silence. This wasn't ordinary marksmanship. It was battlefield geometry. Terrain. Timing. Patience. The room reached its quietest moment when the drone displayed the collapse of the enemy command post. The commander fell. Machine guns stopped. Spotters scattered. Within minutes, the entire ambush unraveled. Captain Mercer slowly exhaled. She didn't defeat 14 men. His voice was barely above a whisper. She defeated the plan. Nobody argued. Brooks stared at the frozen image of Emily crossing another ridgeline alone. I laughed when she said she was recon-trained. His words sounded heavier than any apology. Holt looked at the notebook resting on the table. Curiosity finally overcame him. He opened it carefully. Every page contained hand-drawn terrain sketches. Wind notes. Elevation calculations. Observation times. No dramatic entries. No boasts. Only careful preparation. Near the last page, one sentence was written in neat block letters. The mission begins long before the first shot. Captain Mercer closed the notebook gently. Outside the operations center window, Emily Carter walked across the base carrying her rifle case toward the armory. She had already cleaned the dust from her boots. To everyone else, the battle had become the biggest story on the base. To Emily, it had become another completed mission. For the first time since meeting her, every Marine inside the operations center understood why Recon Marines rarely introduced themselves. Their work always spoke first. The following morning, the mountains looked peaceful again. Sunlight spilled across the same valley where smoke and gunfire had filled the air less than 24 hours earlier. Recovery teams collected damaged equipment while engineers repaired the crater left by the first explosion. To anyone arriving late, it looked like just another military operation. Only the Marines who had survived knew how close they had come to never leaving that valley. Inside the morning briefing room, Captain Daniel Mercer stood before the assembled platoon. No speeches. No dramatic ceremony. Only a single photograph projected onto the screen. It showed the ridgeline from above. 14 red markers circled the enemy firing positions. One blue line traced an impossible route weaving between them. Captain Mercer let the room study the image. "This," he said quietly, "is how close we came to losing every vehicle in that valley." Nobody spoke. Corporal Ethan Brooks sat in the back row, unable to take his eyes off the blue line. Yesterday he had laughed when Emily introduced herself. Yesterday he had called her warning an overreaction. Yesterday he had watched her disappear and believed she had abandoned them. Now he understood she had been the only person moving toward the real fight. Mercer stepped aside. Emily Carter happened to be walking past the briefing room carrying a maintenance case toward the armory. She hadn't even realized the meeting had started. The captain opened the door. "Corporal Carter." She stopped. "Yes, sir." "Come inside for a minute." Emily entered quietly, still wearing the same calm expression she carried before every mission. Every Marine in the room turned toward her. No one laughed. No one whispered. The silence itself felt different. Captain Mercer looked at the platoon. "Yesterday, this Marine gave us a warning." He paused. "We ignored it. No excuses followed. No attempt to soften the truth. Only honesty." Staff Sergeant Holt was the first to stand. Without saying a word, he raised his hand in a respectful salute. One by one, every Marine in the room stood beside him. Boots scraped against the concrete floor. Dozens of hands came sharply to their brows. Emily looked genuinely uncomfortable. She returned the salute with quiet professionalism. "You don't have to do that," she said. Holt lowered his hand. "Actually." He smiled slightly. "We do." Brooks stepped forward carrying the folded topographic map Emily had tried to show them before the convoy entered the valley. "I should have listened." Emily accepted the map. "We all miss things." Brooks shook his head. "No. We missed you." For a moment, nobody spoke. The words carried more weight than any formal commendation. Emily carefully folded the map and placed it back inside her pack. As she turned to leave, a young private standing near the doorway hesitated before asking the question everyone had been thinking. "Ma'am." She looked back. "Why didn't you tell us what you could do?" Emily smiled almost imperceptibly. "Because if people only trust warnings after reading a resume." She glanced toward the photograph of the valley. "They've already waited too long." She adjusted the strap on her pack and walked out into the bright morning sunlight. The room remained silent until she disappeared beyond the doorway. Only then did Captain Mercer quietly speak the lesson every Marine would remember long after the mission reports had been archived. Rank earns authority. He looked around the room. Skill earns respect. Outside, Emily Carter continued toward the armory at the same unhurried pace as always. She didn't ask anyone to believe her. She never had. She simply let the mission speak louder than she ever could.